Hello, Mr. Kirby. How are you? Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Please, go ahead. Welcome to DW's interview with John Kirby. He is the coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council here in the White House. Mr. Kirby, thank you so much for this interview and for your time. We know you are very busy, especially these days.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. I do have to start our interview talking about China, but not about the suspected spy balloon, about the fragile relations between the United States and China. We do know that Secretary Blinken has postponed his trip, his visit to China, but what are the consequences for the US-Chinese relations?
Look, nothing has changed about President Biden's view that we want to pursue competition with China, but we don't see conflict. That hasn't changed, even in light of all the headlines lately with this balloon that we downed off the East Coast. That was an unacceptable intrusion into our sovereign airspace, and the president decided to take action at the earliest opportunity he could do so safely so that nobody on the ground got hurt. We're going to see what we learn from the debris as we bring it up from the bottom of the ocean, but this is not an uncommon practice for the Chinese to engage in terms of flying surveillance balloons over many countries, and have been doing it for quite some time. It certainly doesn't, this incident, and the fact that Secretary Blinken had to postpone his trip, it doesn't help get the relationship back on to the solid footing that we hoped it would after the G20, when President Xi and President Biden met and agreed that we needed to get our two teams together to start trying to build back some of those bilateral communication vehicles, if you will, that the Chinese cut off after Speaker Pelosi went to Taiwan. So things are certainly more tense right now. There's no question about that. But it is tension that is of the Chinese own making.
Does the United States trust China?
It's not about whether we trust China or not. Clearly, China, as all sovereign nations, will act in their own self-interest. But the issue is that the way they act in their own self-interest continually undermines, and this balloon incident is a perfect example, undermines a rules-based international order that respects sovereignty. And that is the concern with China's bellicose rhetoric and their aggressive actions perhaps in the South China Sea and in other places in the Indo-Pacific, bullying their neighbors and other nations and making false maritime claims. So the issue is not about trust. It's about the fact that the Chinese routinely are flouting what should be the rules-based international order that we all should want to pursue.
Talking about a rumor that is in a way also connected to that, perhaps distrust. There's a rumor that Xi Jinping might be meeting Putin in Moscow sometime soon. We've heard that rumor in Berlin, in Washington, D.C., and also in Beijing. There's supposedly already an invitation from Putin to Xi Jinping for February 20th, so in a couple of days. Do you know more about these rumors? Could you elaborate on these rumors, and what would this mean, an image of Xi Jinping and Putin shaking hands a couple of days before the one-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine?
Well, I certainly can't speak to Mr. Xi's travel plans. That's something that the PRC would have to talk to. I would tell you a couple of things, and we've been clear about this with the Chinese, privately and publicly. This is not the time for business as usual with Mr. Putin and with Russia, as they continue, even as you and I are sitting here, to kill innocent Ukrainian people and to violate that country's sovereignty and to threaten that country's independence. This is not the time for business as usual with Russia, and we would like to see China join the rest of the world, nearly everybody in the rest of the world.
What if they don't? What if they don't?
To punish and to hold Russia accountable for what it's doing inside Ukraine. Well, they're gonna have to make their decisions, but we believe that they can still make better choices about not supporting Mr. Putin. Now, we haven't seen them provide lethal weapons or anything like that, but they're still buying Russian oil. So and they haven't come out and condemned what Mr. Putin is doing. So we would. If there's going to be a discussion between the two leaders, we would certainly hope that President Xi would take a stand with the rest of the international community and make it clear to Mr. Putin that what he's doing is unacceptable.
China is saying they are opposed to the war in Ukraine, but at the same time, they are keeping their ties open, their diplomatic and economic ties open to Russia. Does
Well,
the
so
United
do we.
States...
I mean, we have open diplomatic relations with Russia. We still have an embassy there.
Okay, yes, diplomatic, yes, but not economic ties, right?
That's right. I mean, we are, and so many of our European allies and partners are really putting a cost on the Russian economy. We would like to see China join us in that.
And does the United States have any plans to negotiate with Beijing about cutting ties?
It's not about negotiating with Beijing on cutting ties. We have been very clear, as I said, with the Chinese and Chinese leaders publicly and privately, that they have a choice that they must make. They have not made the choice yet to fully embrace the rest of the world in condemning this action, this illegal, unprovoked invasion of a sovereign, independent state.
Is there a new date for Secretary of State Blinken's trip to China?
This is not the appropriate time, as Secretary Blinken has said, for him to make his trip to China. And that's unfortunate because we were looking forward to trying to get the relationship on a better footing. But obviously now, in the context of this egregious violation of our airspace, it's not the time for Secretary Blinken to travel to Beijing. But it's only been postponed. We didn't cancel it. And it'll be up to Secretary Blinken to determine, when the right time is going forward. But I don't have a date on the calendar for you.
Let's talk about a bit about the war in Ukraine and Germany's role in it. Well, obviously, Chancellor Scholz put President Biden under pressure by saying that he will not send tanks to Ukraine if the United States doesn't do the same. What was the impact of this in the US-German relations? Did it have a negative impact or a positive impact?
Germany is one of our staunchest allies and a good friend and partner in Europe. And I would take issue a little bit with the frame that the Chancellor put pressure on President Biden, what the Chancellor was saying, and I think it's reinforced by what we've seen throughout this 11, almost now 12 months of war, is how important American leadership is, and how important it is for America to not only be seen being a leader and a convener of contributions to Ukraine, but actually doing that work. And so, we did agree with Germany in a coordinated announcement that we would provide tanks. Now, the German tanks, the Leopards, will no doubt be able to get on the ground sooner than our Abrams tanks. But we were moving in lockstep with Germany. And I'll tell you this, and Germany's come under criticism from other corners. The German government, the German people have continued to step up in support of Ukraine. They have, just like we have, evolved their contributions of systems and weapons with the way the war has evolved. And that's very much appreciated, and it should be very much noted.
But if you're saying that the help and the support for Ukraine is evolving as the war is evolving, my question would be, where's the limit? Where's the red line? Are you going to support Ukraine all the way until they say stop?
President Biden has said, the G7 leaders have said, for as long as it takes. Now, we would like to see as long as it takes end today. We think the war could end today if Mr. Putin would just do the right thing and pull his troops out of Ukraine, where they have no business being in the first place. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen today. Mr. Putin shows no indication of being willing to stop this war, so we're going to stay at this for as long as it takes. The idea here is to help Ukraine succeed on the battlefield so that if and when we get to the negotiating table, they can succeed in negotiations.
What is the definition of the ending of the war? Would it be
Ukraine
going back to there's a Ukrainian definition of the end of the war, and there's probably a US definition of the end of the war.
No, that's just it. You're asking a question that is much better put to the Ukrainians and to President Zelensky. We are not going to dictate terms to President Zelensky. We're not going to tell him, you've got to negotiate for this, and you got to sit down at this time. His country has been invaded. His people are being killed. His soldiers are fighting back. He gets to determine what victory looks like, and he gets to determine if and when he's ready to go to the negotiating table. What we're going to do with our allies and partners, including Germany, is to continue to provide him the weapons, the systems, the capabilities, the supplies, the training that his troops need to continue to succeed on the battlefield.
As long as he wants.
For as long as it takes to end this war. Again, I want to submit this war could end very quickly if Mr. Putin would just do the right thing. But no, Instead, he's going after civilian targets. He's bombing playgrounds and hospitals and schools. He's trying to shut out the lights and turn off the water in the middle of winter because he knows that when his troops run into Ukrainian armed forces, that they're running into a buzzsaw, that the Ukrainian armed forces are better trained, better equipped, supported by the rest of the world, and he's resorting to more brutal tactics as a result.
When are the Abrams tanks arriving? When are they arriving in Ukraine, and where in Europe is the training taking place?
The tanks won't show up, our tanks won't show up for many months. We're procuring new tanks for them, so that will take some time. As I said,
it's more
likely that the German Leopard tanks will get there sooner. It'll take many months, and that's about as far as the Pentagon has been able to go in terms of describing it. Obviously, we know that there's a war on, and so we're going to do this as quickly as possible, but it's going to take many months. As for the training, we're not going to wait for the tanks to show up. We want those tanks, when they arrive, to fall on ready hands. And so the Pentagon is putting a training package together for Ukrainian tanker soldiers. It'll be outside of Ukraine. The exact location and timing is still being worked out. Again, that's really for the Pentagon to determine, and they're still working their way through the plans.
Germany is among the largest economies in the world. Does the United States see Germany as the leader nation in Europe?
Germany, in terms of supporting Ukraine, they led Europe in terms of financial contributions to Ukraine, even before they started to increase providing weapons and systems. There's no question that Germany remains a very important country on the continent and has terrific influence. And we understand that, as Chancellor Scholz said, that they don't take that influence for granted. They don't take their history for granted, which was part of the reason why tanks were a more difficult decision to make for them. I think everybody respects that and understands it. But they're a powerful, powerful ally, a reliable friend and partner, and we look forward to continuing to work with them.
Do you think that Germany's history is holding the country back?
Oh, that's not for me. That's not for me to say. That's a question that only Germans can answer. I think there is nobility, though, in a country that knows and understands and respects its past, and factors the psychology of that past, into their decision making.
In Germany, many see the United States as the guarantor, as the leader for peace and security in Europe. Is the United States aware of that, and is the United States willing to take that role?
President Biden is absolutely aware of the unique role and influence that the United States plays on the world stage, not just in Europe, but around the entire globe. And he is a president who puts a premium on his relationships with foreign leaders and on wielding American power and influence in a responsible way. He understands that we have convening power. It was the United States who came up with the idea, Secretary Austin at the Pentagon, of this Ukraine contact group, getting nations together, now more than 50, not just from Europe, but around the world, to come together at frequent intervals to provide contributions and support to Ukraine. It was the United States who led the efforts to put together a distribution center outside Ukraine so that aid and assistance could get in. It's the United States who is leading the world in financial assistance as well as security assistance. President Biden understands that power and that influence very, very well, having been in public service his whole life. And he believes in maintaining that posture of responsible American leadership on the world stage.
Is there still a diplomatic solution for the war?
Well, we certainly hope so. Again, we'd all like to see it end today. We certainly want to make sure that if and when President Zelensky can get to the negotiating table and pursue a diplomatic end, that he can do so with the wind at his back and with a sense of strength. That's what we're looking for. But I mean, again, one of the things that President Biden has really focused on, and this kind of gets to your previous question, is revitalizing America's vast network of alliances and partnerships, which is something he has invested an awful lot of time and energy into, because he knows that no one nation, no matter how powerful, can do all of this alone. We need each other. We need the unique capabilities that we can bring. again, the tanks issue is a great example of that. The Leopard tanks that the Germans have and have provided to other nations, they're very capable. And they can make a difference on the battlefield in ways and in faster ways than we could with our Abrams. President Biden understands that, and he respects the contributions, the unique capabilities that so many of our allies and partners have, and it's going to have to continue to be a team effort here.
And not only in Europe, but also in Latin America. For example, Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, who will be coming this week to Washington, D.C., Brazil has the ammunition that the Leopard tanks need, but he said last week to Chancellor Scholz, we are not going to send that ammunition to Ukraine. Well, Lula is going to be here. Will that be an issue on the table between President Biden and President Lula?
There's no doubt in my mind that the war in Ukraine will come up in the discussions with President Lula. I think we can expect that. I don't think there's a single conversation that President Biden has had with foreign leaders at all over the last year where they didn't discuss the war in Ukraine and what the international community is doing to try to support Ukraine's ability to defend itself. That said, and this gets back to the conversation about the contact group, 50 some odd nations, they all come together willingly. They all come together of their own volition, and they all provide contributions that they are comfortable providing. The United States is not out there twisting arms. We're not forcing or even trying to force nations to give more or to give something specifically. Do we talk to them about their capabilities and what might be useful to the Ukrainians? Absolutely we do. Secretary Austin burns up the phone line sometimes, as well as Secretary Blinken, trying to have those conversations. But in the end, it comes down to every country making the decision that it is comfortable making, because these countries also have sovereign national security defense needs of their own. And we respect that, just like we have them too. We respect that. So it's got to be up to each country, each leader, to determine what they're willing to provide. We obviously want to see as many contributions as possible, because we know, especially now as we're well into winter, that time is not on the Ukrainian forces' side. We believe that the Russians are going to want to take advantage of improving weather in the coming months to conduct more offensives along that front, all the way from the Donbass down to Kherson, and that the Ukrainians are going to need all the help they can get to not only rebuff those offensives, but to be able to go on the offense themselves. So this is a critical time, and we, the Germans, stepping up to provide the kinds of systems and capabilities while we can now before the spring. We certainly want to see other nations do the same. But again, we respect those decisions.
Mr. Kirby, thank you so much for this interview.
My pleasure.